All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Cotter. I am the operations and tech person for Boston Women's Film Festival. I'm here with Peppa to talk about her film in our experimental and animation shorts program entitled Rage. And I'm excited. So, Peppa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Um, so I'm sure our audience, once they've seen your program, your film is super distinctive in the program. It's very timely with the sort of political climate and the sort of social climate that we have going on in the United States. Tell me a little bit about how the sort of the film came about.
It's actually very beautiful that it is being shown in this time because it was made exactly 4 years ago during this time. So I felt there was something very special about that. A lot of my interests come in like dichotomies between healing and destruction. And the focus on rage for me came from a few places. My own personal relationship with emotion and the politics behind showing emotion and the ways that it can be shown. And I think I can speak to that more in general, but that was something that always struck me with rage, especially, and the way it manifests. But I look, and a lot of my influence in my work comes from um, researching mythology and histories with regards to gender and ideas around insanity in regards to gender specifically. And the expression of emotion and kind of the history of the development of insanity is maybe a complicated term, but definitely comes along with this kind of what is allowed to be shown, what is repressed, how does oppression fall into that conversation, these kinds of things. So what really kicked off the project was when I started, I was reading The Natural History of the Senses, a wonderful novel, and I was reading about briefly the goddess Kali, Hindu goddess, also in tantric teachings, which is not my spirituality, but it was very powerful to learn a little bit more about her as a figure of a kind of manifestation of wrath that is neither kind of transcends the kind of like good and evil of like the traditional way of thinking, and kind of represents creation and destruction. So that was kind of how I really dove into thinking deeply about paying homage to this emotion of rage.
Nice. So to kind of like pick up from the sort of your sort of research and mythology and stuff like that, kind of what I was kind of taking from that is the sort of the myth of sort of hysteria and sort of like anger and sort of that expression of emotion that comes out a lot, especially, it's always pinned to women. Men don't really get that sort of emotional sort of, I guess, baggage, or even taggage, I guess would be the right word. But what I found really interesting about your film is, although you don't really see a lot of gender because it's close-ups of mouth, there are definitely some male sort of toned voices in it. And what I'm sort of really interested in is, we talk a lot about in cinema about male gaze, and I mean, there's got to be a female gaze as well. And so how do you feel like you bring a female gaze into your filmmaking?
That's a really interesting question. I think uh, You know, I also want to speak to the fact that we're looking at the mouth, right? And in that context, so I think that there is a complexity in like objectification that I am really interested in, like the complexity of that. And for me, I've never considered myself bringing a necessarily like female gaze, but I'm really interested in that idea. And I think that focusing on the mouths for me was a very sensual experience in the editing process even. Um, but it went much further than sensuality. So I think there is a kind of lure in the gaze in this of the mouth. Like I definitely was responding to the sensuality of lips and just whatever is happening with tongues and teeth and that there's kind of a lure that happens. But I also um, felt that in the whole production and just watching the whole thing, or just even through editing over and over, um, it the kind of gaze on the sensual part of our bodies became a very different thing. Like the mouth turned into a very different thing, and it took me in and out of sensuality in a way that I think, as far as a gaze, it complicates, I think, the kind of idea of the gaze being like an objectification. So
Hmm.
for me, maybe in answering the question is kind of that the gaze becomes a kind of complex um, experience of sensuality, obscurity, maybe like grotesque in some ways, powerful. I felt the mouth is a very powerful expression of emotion. So, and there's also like an idea of listening that I
Mm.
think comes out of like, feminisms and ideas around like a femme person. And I think that the experience of listening is deeply ingrained in different feminisms. So I think that that was also part of, um, that kind of experience.
Well, I mean, I can completely see where that kind of comes from, because because it is such a close. I'm like, I kind of want to do this. And I'm surprised I didn't film like this.
Yeah.
Um, for those who haven't seen the film, it's the film kind of sets it up where there's a close up of everyone's sort of mouth from like nostrils down, so it's a real close shot. It's kind of interesting because it's like the mouth is an opening, but it's also, we're constantly projecting out through it as well, so it is that sort of in and out. And it's a lot of times, speech and vocalization is communication. And I felt like, not only are you kind of transfixed on this sort of close up of the mouth, and I get the sort of sensuality of it, because kind of found myself, like lingering on the lips, and there was sort of like, I guess for me, it wasn't necessarily just like sort of objectification, but more consideration,
Yeah.
which I feel like falls into a lot of sort of what I'm sort of kind of seeing, as far as like more of a female sort of gaze, as opposed to men seem to just like, it's like this. And women seem to kind of like take it all in periphery, and also kind of like the rounder edges as well, which is kind of interesting sort of like dichotomy of that looking. um, but I mean, what is also very compelling with your film is that sort of what is being said, and that sort of description. And maybe can you kind of talk about um, the sort of process of how you chose the sort of what was being said, because that's a lot of control in the editing.
Yes. It was honestly fully came from intuition. I did not go into the project really knowing what I was going to focus on. And because the participants were given a private space, I wasn't in the space at all. The amount of time spent and the things that were said varied extremely. Like, I mean, there was so much variation. And what I noticed through the editing was this pulse that was throughout everyone's um, reflections on this emotion. And things started to, some words started to be repeated a lot. But the actual experiences that some people shared were like almost a jumping point to this kind of pulse that became really the poetry of the piece for me and what I wanted to kind of focus in on, which was more so the the feelings of rage, the feelings, there were some moments in the video that people hinted, there were hints of things that may have brought rage to the surface. But because there was no kind of extended one person's narrative, I really wanted to capture a like a life pulse almost, which I tried to do through not only words but breath and pausing. So that really came about through the editing process, like just in the aftermath. I was not expecting that outcome. So that's kind of how I started editing, was kind of just listening to the fact that there were these commonalities, there was this pulse through the sharing of the emotion that was very loud and very quiet at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I like that was one of the things that I really kind of took from your film, was the editing. And I love, I mean, as a filmmaker, I love editing because I mean that's sort of your construction of your narrative, as it were. But I feel like you did this sort of really amazing thing where it was such disparate sort of storytelling of like personal storytelling of all these different mouths, but there was such a commonality. You found that thread there, threw it out, that kind of made it make sense, which kudos to you to do that, because I'm sure it was a hot mess to put together.
Yeah, lots of footage, definitely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you probably had a wealth of footage, which
So
is
much
great.
footage,
um
yes.
so how long did it take you to sort of like from conception to final product did it take you to make it?
It was a 4-month project. So it was literally from September until December. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, 4 months.
Well, that's great. So who are your sort of, as a filmmaker, who are your influences?
Um, I feel like over the years, my influences have changed. I'm like currently um, getting into Marian Banani, who uses a lot of comedy in her videos. And I mean, I think she's strictly a video artist. And when I was first getting into film or into like more experimental video, I was, oldie but goodie. Like I always went to like Pippa Wrist's work, who I think there was, who also actually parallels Banani's work in a way of really a lot of vibrancy,
Hmm.
a lot of color, and um, just play, a lot of play in the work, even though there are a lot of very serious themes being discussed. And I think that that's something that play has, as time has passed, become a much more intentional way of, my kind of intuitive process and the way I work. At the time of the film, I wasn't necessarily thinking that way, but I yeah, I think that that's something that's kind of come with time, is kind of the importance, especially with dealing with kind of heavy subject matters,
Hmm.
that having some play in there has consequently been really, really great, and that's become part of kind of the way I make work now.
Well, I mean, it's good. You definitely have that the sense from watching it, because it could have been a really hard film to watch given the subject matter, but there is sort of like, I don't want to say comedy because that's like not the right word, but there is a playfulness with it as well. And the playfulness, the sensuality, and it like sort of like makes it digestible which is kind of like a really, it's a fine line to like to walk. And
Yes.
you did it very well, which I'm like, kudos, like I said, kudos to
Thank
you
you.
for sort of like, kind of really sort of figuring out that sort of balance with it. And that's all kind of a wonderful thing. um so what are you working on now?
So I'm currently in graduate school, and I'm in a sculpture program. And my work has kind of taken on the form of installation.
Cool.
So I'm working on the two things, really big things. I've been doing also a lot of writing. So big writing projects there, which is kind of new for me. But I'm working on kind of creating these spaces that play with healing and toxicity together. So I'm using a lot of materiality that is related to kind of talk like those two things. Historically and currently, I'm playing with a lot of plastic packaging as a kind of baseline fundamental material. And I am working with clay. And the histories I'm kind of doing in my research, I spoke a little bit to the history that I kind of look into.
Hmm.
The history, one of the histories I'm looking into is the House of Horrors or the Grand Guignol
Hmm.
history, and how that history intersected with the creation of asylums in France,
Hmm.
and how a lot of the psychologists were actually writers for the plays at the Grand Guignol. So there's kind of an interesting history that's unfolding there. So I'm getting into my thesis for graduate school, and that's kind of unfolding there and working with these heavy histories, but trying to use materials that are close to me and some that have been very therapeutic. Clay, I've been working with some like scented clay, like trying to make scent, and so a lot of play, and hopefully that will culminate into a bigger installation that people can kind of come in and experience, a lot of experiential work. So I don't know how that is going to function in this time, but that is my idea, and we'll see what happens.
I think we need more like serious, more installation work in
Yes.
period, because I feel like that's a realm of art that we don't necessarily like get a lot of contact with. And I always appreciate a really good installation. I've done installation pieces myself, and I've always really enjoyed the sort of the working a room, I guess, and sort of trying to create that sort of space and that sort of vibe and that intention that you're trying to get across through your artwork. I think about like sculptors like Eva Hess and like just that sort of like really kind of like when you said toxicity and like all of a sudden I thought of Eva Hess, like
Yes,
it
of
just popped in
course.
my mind because like her work was so like amazing and powerful and also so toxic at the same
Right,
time that it was like deteriorating in front of
right,
you,
right. Yes,
which is kind of super interesting, to like work it to make something that's like not permanent, because usually when you think of sculpture you think of bronze, you think of stone, you think of marble, you think of that sort of like kind of thing, but that sort of like transience is really kind of like a compelling sort of medium.
yes, definitely.
Do you think you're gonna have some video work in your installations as well?
Possibly. I love working with video. I love editing. Um, I think it always just depends on like the themes I'm working with and how they translate into whatever medium they're translating into. So I last year I did a few installations that were video installations that used projectors, and I was really excited about them. Uh, I'm moving towards like more material at this moment, but I video is always it's always there, even if it's not fully conceptualized yet. It's still there.
I guess so. My last question for you, and then I'm gonna give you a chance to, if you want to plug something, go next. My last question, and I do this for everybody, is like, so what's your favorite film?
Oh,
Give me a hot film that you can recommend to somebody.
yes. Okay. Well, that's a great question. I have so many different genres that I feel close to and also like far away from. But I would say that um,
And no judgment.
what?
No
Sorry.
judgment. No
Oh
judgment.
yeah, no. I mean, one of my all-time most outrageous films that makes me feel everything is Pink Flamingos.
Nice.
And I know that that is a bit of a maybe statement of a choice for a favorite. I really I appreciate film, like feature films that really push a lot of boundaries and are very bodily. And I feel like that was a film that when I first watched it, I was like, I will never, ever, ever forget this and how it made me feel. And it's very powerful. And I don't feel that way a lot with a lot of films.
Yep.
And it's just a fabulous, amazing, and epic endeavor as a project. So,
Yeah, so I mean it's such a wonderful film anyways, and I mean just the performance. I mean he is pretty much an experimental filmmaker when it kind of comes down to it, because he
right,
was sort of working very independently and very low budgetly, and he had a cast of characters that believed in the process with him that he kind of like
right.
brought along. So how wonderful. So
Yes.
any things that you want to like promote, or last words for the fans out there?
Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful to be part of this year. I'm honored, and you can follow me at This Is Peppa on Instagram, which has a direct link to my website. And there will be new work updated soon, probably the next month. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Oh, I mean, thanks for spending some time. And to all the audience out there, Rage is playing in our experimental and animated shorts program on the Eventive platform through the festival run, which ends on the 18th. Please go to bwff2020.eventive.org for the entire festival schedule. Watch some films. Ladies makes films are great. Let's do it. And thanks everyone for joining us.